A week ago, that was last Thursday, North Korea test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile, essentially ending a self-imposed moratorium on long-range testing that had been in place since the year 2017. For more on issues pertaining to the Korean Peninsula, I have Professor Min Jung-hoon from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy here in the studio. Professor Min, it's a pleasure to have you back.
My pleasure.
I also have Professor Mason Ritchie at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies live on the line. Professor Ritchie, again, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Great, thanks. Happy to be here.
Right, we'll start here in the studio then. Professor Min, let's start with your interpretation of North Korea's latest display of defiance.
Well, basically, I think that North Korea's the recent ICBM test is the signal that North Korea want to reset the nuclear talks with the United States. As you know, the current nuclear talks between North Korea and U.S. Have been maintained since 2018. And suspending North Korea's nuclear test and the long-range missile test have functioned as the red line for the negotiation. So the two countries have recognized that not crossing the red line is the bottom line, that they want to remain in the negotiation. But as you know, since they failed to reach an agreement in the 2019 Hanoi summit, there has been no progress in the negotiation. And North Korea made it clear that it could return the negotiation only when U.S. takes back its hostile policy against North Korea. But U.S. has not taken any serious or the meaningful measure for relieving economic sanctions or the security guarantee for North Korea. And finally, the Conservative Party will take power in South Korea. And it means that South Korea's policy on North Korea will likely change in the coming years. So taken together, I think North Korea perceives that it doesn't need to keep the current negotiation setting because it's very difficult for the nuclear talks to make a progress under the current negotiation setting. So I think that North Korea want to reset the negotiating setting by crossing the red line, and it also want to make a new negotiation environment that could be favorable to North Korea. And I think the Ukraine crisis also contributed to the North Korea's making decision to cross the red line because the relationships among US and Russia and China got worse in terms of the Ukraine crisis. And North Korea, in terms of that kind of the conflicts among the world powers, North Korea could have a higher probability or possibility that Russia and China would be on each side in the international stage.
Right, so North Korea essentially is seeking to secure some kind of leverage then. Professor Richard, there's also been a bit of talk about the type of ICBM that was test-fired on the 24th of March. North Korea claims it was a Hwasong-17, but South Korea insists it was a Hwasong-15, while the US, for its part, says analysis is still underway. How do you explain the US's cautious stance?
Well, I guess the first thing is we probably don't know everything. The second point I think it's important to remember is that intelligence collection and analysis is complicated and difficult work sometimes. So it might take some time and there might be some differing perspectives. I think what appears to be most likely is that the March 24th ICBM launch was in fact a Hwasong-15 that was misrepresented by the Kim regime as a Hwasong-17 to make up for domestic propaganda purposes. The failed March 16 Hwasong-17 launch, which exploded in the vicinity of the airspace above Pyongyang and was potentially even visible to parts of the population in North Korea. So I think that this, most likely faked video of the Hwasong-17 launch on the 24th was presumably for domestic propaganda purposes. But I think it really opens up an interesting question, which is if the North Koreans were willing to lie about this domestically, but yet probably would have to know that this fabrication of the launch on of the Hwasong 17th on the 24th would be known by the international intelligence community, what else might North Korea have lied about that's a bit less visible and more opaque, such as reentry vehicle survivability, warhead compactness and lightness, and missile guidance? I think it throws into question in part some elements of the credibility of their nuclear deterrent. I mean, just to be clear, I do think that they have an ICBM that can reach the United States, but there might be some reevaluation of exactly how sophisticated their nuclear and missile program actually is.
Right, a valid point, of course. Meanwhile, Professor Min, what then can you tell us about the differences between a Hwasong 17 and a Hwasong 15?
Well, but basically, I think it's not clear if North Korea succeeded in the launching Hwasong 17, which is called the monster ICBM at this point of time. But it seems to be clear that North Korea's the ICBM capability has been advanced over the years. Of course, there is the technological differences between the two types of missiles. The Hwasong 17 can fly longer and could have the multiple the nuclear warheads on it or some other technological features. But let alone such kind of the technological differences, I want to point out that at least North Korea succeeded in launching an ICBM this time that at least updated the Hwasong 15, and it confirmed that it can fly over 13,000 kilometers and reach anywhere across the United States. But its re-entry technology and the multiple nuclear warhead technology have not proved yet. And the experts assess that it could take some time before North Korea would possess such technologies, but probably at least 6 months or a year or 2 years. But even so, there's no doubt. We have to remember this kind of thing. There's no doubt that North Korea's missile capabilities, including ICBMs, have made meaningful progress over the years. And North Korea is imposing a serious security threat to the United States and its Asian or regional allies, including South Korea and Japan. Right. That's the big concern.
And beyond missiles, Professor Ritchie, as my colleague Song Yeon mentioned earlier, there are also widespread concerns that North Korea may be preparing for a nuclear test as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there is speculation that North Korea could be preparing for another nuclear test in the tunnels at Punggye-ri. We don't know how long that tunnel preparation might take. We've seen estimates as little as perhaps a month. It could be 3 months. It could be longer. We don't really have much of an estimation of exactly how damaged the tunnels were by the detonations that took place there several years ago. Why would North Korea want to do that? I think the best guess that we have is for nuclear warhead development towards tactical nuclear warheads, either ones that could be more easily fitted onto short-range and medium-range ballistic missiles, or as Professor Min alluded to earlier, with the Hwasong 17, smaller warheads that might be placed on top of the Hwasong 17 as multiple independently retargetable reentry vehicles, or even just multiple, even if not independently targeted reentry vehicles in order to defeat U.S. missile defense assets.
Right. And Professor Min, simply speaking, how do these aggressive actions, if you will, by North Korea look to affect the peace process here on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, personally, I think that although the North Korea's recent ICBM test could reset the current negotiation setting of the nuclear talks, but it doesn't mean that the entire peace process on the Korean Peninsula has gone down the drain. I don't think so, because the current peace process on the Korean Peninsula has got some kind of the impact on the establishing peace regime on the Korean Peninsula or something like that. And I think that once North Korea, U.S. are agreed to resume the nuclear talks in the future, I think it is likely that they will talk about what they want to exchange to make a progress for the denuclearization of North Korea on the basis of what they already achieved from the Panmunjom Declaration and the joint statements of the Singapore Summit in 2018. As you know, the Biden administration revealed its policy on North Korea last year, and it mentioned that it would respect the Panmunjom Declaration. So it seems that the future negotiation between North Korea and U.S. will likely proceed on the agreements of the declarations. Right? So I think what we achieved from the peace process on the Korean Peninsula will contribute to facilitating the nuclear talks in the future. But it's not clear at this point how North Korea and U.S. will narrow down the gaps they have, because neither party want to make a concession first. So that's why I think the North Korea wanted the show of its advanced the ICBM capability this time or the nowadays. I mean, it's a kind of way of enhancing its negotiating power in preparation for the resumption of the talks with the United States in the future.
Right, and speaking about the United States, Professor Richard, earlier this week the Biden administration disclosed its defense spending and strategy plan. What is your assessment of this blueprint amid the host of challenges that the US faces from China, Russia and North Korea?
So let's start with a little bit of budget context. So the 2022 U.S. Department of Defense budget was about $753 billion, to which Congress came back in later and added another $25 billion. So that takes you up to $278 billion, which was the baseline budget that was used for the proposed 2023 budget. So where does the extra $35 billion go to reach the $813 billion figure that the proposed budget from the Biden administration comes from? Some of it comes from Ukraine and Russia putting assumed pressure on U.S. defense to respond to the crisis. And we see that some of the money being earmarked potentially for the European Defense Initiative. Warplanes, more warships. There's also money for additional money for artificial intelligence, for hypersonics, additional communication and command and control developments as well. A lot of the money, however, additional money in this budget comes from nuclear modernization, and the U.S. is undertaking a nuclear modernization effort that may end up touching all three of the legs of the triad, and that's very expensive. So I don't actually think that North Korea per se plays much of a role in this. Certainly China does, of course, but a lot of this stuff that's contained in this budget can of course be applied in some way to the larger deterrence effort against North Korea.
Right. Professor Min, it appears that securing solidarity within the UN Security Council against North Korea's belligerence is a daunting task, with countries like Russia and China shying away from stern words of condemnation. What are your thoughts?
Well, so I agree with the point of view that it's really hard for the UN Security Council to make the resolution to put another or the further sanctions against North Korea. I think it's mainly because the U.S.-China strategic competition and the Ukraine crisis are affecting how major players respond to the North Korean provocations. As you know, as the U.S.-China strategic competition has been intensified, the Biden administration tries to mobilize its democratic allies and partners, such as South Korea and Japan, in order to check the rise of China. Meanwhile, China also tries to mobilize its old friends and partners, such as Russia and North Korea, to preserve its influence against the United States. In addition, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been a momentum that China is strengthening its relationship with Russia. And North Korea is also taking advantage of the U.S.-China strategic competition and the war in Ukraine to strengthen its relationships with Russia and China. And nowadays, it seems that North Korea is also preparing for the long-term confrontation with the United States. So it means that we need to understand North Korea's provocations in the context of the East Asia's overall security situation, where power politics among world powers dominates the regional countries' relationships. So I think we are witnessing that geopolitics is emerging again in East Asia and the Korean Peninsula. That put more pressure or the difficulties in terms of resolving the North Korean problems.
Right. And Professor Ritchie, do you suppose China and Russia are likely to perhaps maintain such a non-committal stance in the case of a nuclear test by North Korea?
Well, China and Russia won't like a nuclear test. I don't think by North Korea. Privately, I would imagine, especially China, would probably indicate their lack of enthusiasm for a nuclear test to the Kim regime. But I do not expect that their international and United Nations reaction, notably through the Security Council, would be aimed at really restraining North Korea. I also think that we will probably, even regardless of another seventh North Korean nuclear test, see Russia and China significantly enforce sanctions more than they are. In fact, I think we can probably expect things over time to be moving in the opposite direction, where sanctions enforcement by China and Russia when North Korea will become increasingly lax, and it's already not anywhere near completely enforced as it is now.
Right. Professor Min, come early April, a delegation representing the incoming Yoon administration will be departing for the US for talks on issues of bilateral concern. Having said that, what issues do you believe will dominate these talks?
Well, when the delegation fly to Washington, I think they will discuss many agendas. But I think their priority will be how they would strengthen the ROK-US alliance in the coming years. As you know, South Korea and US have successfully maintained the ROK-US alliance over the 70 years. And the President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has emphasized the importance of the alliance or the relationship with the United States during the presidential campaign. And specifically, his campaign pledges show that his administration will reconstruct the ROK-US alliance and strengthen the comprehensive strategic the relationship with Washington. So in Washington, I think they are likely to exchange their opinions and ideas about how to strengthen the ROK-US alliance under the principle of peace through strength, and how to enhance their cooperation in relation to the US-China strategic competition, like the South Korea potential participation in the vaccine, climate change, and emerging technology working groups under the Quad or something. And regarding North Korean problems, they are likely to focus on how to deter North Korea's the provocations by enhancing the ROK-US the cooperation, such as reconfirming US extended deterrence against North Korea, and revitalizing the joint military exercises between South Korea and the United States, and deploying US strategic assets like B-1B and B-52 bombers to the Korean Peninsula. And last but not least, they are also likely to talk about when they will hold the first summit meeting between South Korea and the US in the coming months.
Right. All right then, Professor Min, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts today. Professor Ritchie, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts as well.
Thanks for having me.